So here we are today in the Archaeological Storage of the National Museum of Iceland. In this room we keep storage conditions such as temperature and humidity at a level which is appropriate for archaeological remains. So here we have both objects and skeletal remains, including animals and humans. And today we're going to have a look at some ancient skeletal remains from kjöraðstæður in Þjórsádal. The skeletons from that site are believed to represent a population which lived in the valley until about 1104 with the eruption of Hekla. So first I'm going to lay out the skeleton in anatomical position, and while I do that I will give some information about each of the bones that I'm setting down. The first bone today is the mandible, so this is the lower jaw. This is an important anatomical element because we can gain information not only about age but also about the sex of the individual, based upon the morphology and degenerative changes of the teeth. We likewise have the os coxae, or the pelvis, which is another anatomical feature extremely important for age and sex estimation in archaeological individuals. Here we have the sacrum. This is the lowest point of the spine. It attaches to the 5th lumbar vertebrae and to the os coxae. Here we have the clavicles, known as viðbein in Icelandic. These make up part of the shoulder girdle. The shoulder girdle. Here we have the humerus. This is the upper arm. Followed by the radius, which is one of the bones in the lower arm. Finally, we have the ulna, the other bone making up the lower arm. Coming down to the leg, we have the femur. This is the thigh bone, or the upper leg bone, which articulates with the os coxae. Then we have the lower bone, the lower leg bone, the tibia. This tibia features a quite severe fracture, but I will come back to that later. Finally, we have some fragments of the fibula, the second bone which articulates with the tibia in the lower leg bone, lower leg, rather. Here we have the upper arm of the left side. So for example, when we try to estimate the side that a bone comes from, we use morphological features such as the shape of the humeral head, which must articulate with the scapulae of the shoulder, meaning that the directions, the shape, and the morphology of the bones give us indications or tell us from which side of the body they should be upon. Some bones are subjected to destructive sampling, and that type of sample can be used for carbon dating and occasionally isotope analysis or even ancient DNA. As you can see here, we have the tibia from the left side, which is unfractured, thereby preserving its normal appearance. Finally, we have the cranium, which, when articulated with the mandible, is known as the skull. Here we can see some of the lumbar vertebrae. There are 5 lumbar vertebrae. These are the ones which come at the lower part of the back and articulate with the sacrum. Next we have some fragments of the thoracic vertebrae and also some of the cervical vertebrae. Finally, we have the scapulae. These articulate with the humerus and the clavicle, forming the rotator cuff of the shoulder. It's quite common to find fragmentary bones amongst archaeological skeletal remains, particularly in the ribs, which tend to fracture in the post-mortem environment quite easily. From the rib cage, it can be quite difficult to side the skeletal remains. However, if you have the preservation of the rib tubercles and the head, which articulate with the vertebrae, then you can often place which side of the body they should come from. Often you're only left with fragments of the body. So if you only have this portion, it can be more difficult. However, you do have this groove here, the visceral groove, which is always facing inferiorly. Here we can see from some very small bones. These are the auditory ossicles. These are quite often lost in archaeological context because they are so small and they tend to fall out of the ear canal when skeletons are excavated. However, there are some methods of making sure that they are recovered from the archaeological burial. And it's quite useful to do so because they've been proven to be an excellent source of ancient DNA. Ancient DNA is generally extracted from dense skeletal elements such as the auditory ossicles, the teeth, or the petrous portion of the temporal bone, which is located here. The samples are first cleaned and then prepared into a powdered form, and then they are subjected to extraction. Of particular interest on this skeleton is the tibial fracture, which can be seen here. What is so special or interesting about this fracture is how poorly healed and aligned it is. Though the person did survive with this for some period after the fracture occurred, as can be witnessed by the new bone growth, the porous new bone growth, they did not survive for very long after the incident. It is even possible that this person passed away due to infection or other complications associated with this fracture. When archaeological remains are found, it's quite often that the teeth will no longer be attached to the actual dental sockets, to the alveolar bone. So one important task is, of course, determining where the teeth actually belong. There are differences between the maxillary and the mandibular teeth, and some of those morphological differences can be used to determine from where they come from. The teeth are an extremely important anatomical element, both for determining health and also for age estimation. So for example, one can use or estimate someone's age at death based upon the dental wear that you can see on the occlusal surface of the teeth. That being said, in Iceland, these type of methods based upon dental wear tend to overestimate someone's age, probably because of the tougher and grittier diet that was consumed in the past. The individual under investigation was probably about 30 years of age when they passed away, while this person was likely an older or late middle-aged adult at the time of death. As you can see, the extent of wear on this individual is far greater than the extent of wear on this individual. As I mentioned earlier, the Ossicles are also extremely important for the purpose of age and sex estimation. For age estimation, we assess the extent of degeneration on the auricular surface. This is the surface which articulates with the sacrum. As one grows older, the surface begins to degenerate. The surface also loses any striations as one grows older. The surface becomes more uniform, and then after that becomes more dense. Another important element on the Ossicles is the pubic bone. The pubic symphysis can also be used for age estimation, and the angle that exists below it when the bone is complete can be used for sex estimation. Unfortunately, due to the fragmentary nature of this element, we cannot use it for those purposes. Using such a fragmentary element for those purposes would undoubtedly provide inaccurate results. Some bones can be subjected to metrical measurements, which can be used for things such as sex estimation or even stature. So for example, you can measure the humerus head. That measures about 43 millimeters. Similarly, you can measure the femoral head, which measures 40 millimeters. So for example, the femoral head measuring 40 millimeters would indicate that this is a female. However, as there can be large females, small males, and everything in between, we cannot really depend upon metrical measurements as a exact means of estimating sex. But these estimations can be quite useful in combination with morphological techniques. So for example, on the Ossicles, you can see in comparison with this male individual, there's quite a difference in the morphology of the male Ossicles and the female Ossicles. So for example, you can see a very wide angle here, whereas you have a very narrow angle here. The skeleton under investigation represents a relatively young female individual. In contrast, we have another individual who has lost the majority of her teeth. This is generally something that happens due to poor hygiene, but also just due to increasing age. Of additional note, this person appears to have had a blunt force trauma injury, which has healed. Might also be interesting to draw attention to the markings which have been placed upon the skull. In the past, it was quite common to mark skeletal remains, and it does in fact have its uses, particularly for the purpose of teaching. However, Today we don't practice this so often anymore. There are also ethical concerns surrounding the marking of human remains. And for example, they can disrupt or complicate pathological analysis if the markings are made on certain skeletal features. It is not a practice that we should continue to employ in the future.